I'm so excited to start introducing some other perspectives into this conversation. So our first perspective says, nowadays, people collect identities just to feel special. What are your thoughts?
I absolutely agree. I feel like I'm sharing identities that are outwardly very obvious to myself. I'm not here telling you I'm a quarter Tunisian and I'm a quarter Greek. I mean, that's just like, if we're interested in getting to know each other, I feel like those are interesting and they're fun and they're a great conversation starter point. But I feel like people collect identities as a way to kind of make themselves stand out and be different. And I feel like the narrative used to be being weird or being different is wrong. And then growing up, I feel like that was kind of switched over at some point. And I feel like now kids are adopting so many of these identities and are so confused. We are told that to be a valid citizen, to be a valid person, you need to have these various underground identities that differentiate you from your peers.
Well, I know you identify as a radical feminist, but yet at the same time you don't, right? Because you don't share that with the world. Why is that?
Because I feel like it separates me a lot from people who, one, might not understand what it means, that might have misconceptions about it, or that would say like, oh, you're a feminazi, you know, those like very much negative things. And I would rather talk openly and talk at a much more equal level with people without taking on those misconceptions. I mean, I'm not wearing a label that says radical feminist right here, but I do present as a white woman. So people will have the opinions of like what they think a white woman should be or do when they see me, but they don't have that about, you know, radical feminists until maybe I like start sharing some more political views.
I agree with what you're saying. One thing I will slightly disagree on is like, I feel like because there's so many identities that sometimes these communities do feel scattered, but I also understand the need to create those identities. That like it might make children or even just adults feel confused. They would probably feel confused anyways. That's how I think, in that now that there's like actual terminology that you can say, wow, I actually see myself in that. Because for the longest time, I thought I was gay. And then I found out bisexual was a thing. And so many people told me that bisexual wasn't a thing. You chose one or the other. And so I was like, wow, now that I know what this definition is, I align with it so much and actually see myself in that. I didn't have the words for it. That now you have the definition, you can actually put it in words. So I think children are going to go through that confusing stage, but I also think like it's nice to have these different potential communities that they can belong to, even if they're just kind of exploring, and hopefully they find who they really are and what their true clarity is.
I think we should try to be, I think more inclusive. I think a lot of times we're very complex individuals. I think one example I can think of is I have a friend who looks white passing, like complete white passing, but yeah, he's a quarter Japanese and he has a really strong relationship with his grandmother. You know, a lot of times people see him, he's like, oh, he's just a white guy, right? Like, or something like that. But he definitely has, you know, that part of his identity, and he does want to, you know, bring that out sometimes. And so absolutely there's times, you know, when people like, they kind of just like grab different identities, you know, even if, you know, oh, I'm 1/16 this, you know, that kind of thing, where maybe they're not fully involved. But I think I would personally like rather err on the side of like being inclusive. And because as you said, like people, they're going to be confused regardless about their identity. I think having some kind of like structure and being able to appeal to that, I think it does have value. I think one example is sexual harassment, right? That term didn't become like a term until like the 1970s. So a lot of people were going through these experiences and they're like, oh, I don't even know what I'm going through. Like, what is this? Once people were able to define that, be like, hey, I think that I am part of this. I think it definitely helped people better grasp what they were going through.
This might be offensive, but I don't understand why we have to jump through so many hoops to remember how someone identifies that day. If it's constantly changing, how genuine can it truly be? What are your thoughts?
That person needs some help.
Tell me more.
Wrote that question. I mean, they clearly are in some pain because I don't understand, and this is me as an empathetic person, thinking like how someone could write a question like that and think that it's from a place of like empathy to another person. Like they have a right, like earlier in our conversation today, you talked about like, you know, today you might identify one way and tomorrow it might be different. You have every right to do that. It's your choice, it's your life. And so I think, you know, if we choose to be in a relationship with people, to be their friends, to be their colleagues, to be their coworkers, to be their neighbors, like it's our responsibility to respect them. I wasn't mad, more so just sad for that person because it seems kind of like quite disappointing that they would think that way.
So I guess going back to that question, how do you think we do create that society where we can all be who we are? And maybe a more specific question I'd love to ask you all. When each of us identifies ourselves, right? There are a lot of the things we've mentioned today that comprise who we are. Do you think we should be striving for a society where we don't have those labels as a part of our identity and you're just yourself? Or do you think that's something that we should continue to lean into? Is that something we should be striving for? What are your thoughts?
We have to lean into them 100%. Like you said, these are the experiences that make us up. How are people going to get to know me if they don't know about all these other components? And I think that we have seen what happens when you do that. When you have to suppress your identities for so long, what happens? And that's why some of these people have mental health crises or they die by suicide, because it's so traumatic to have to hold on to these parts of you that you cannot express. And I think that I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to where we're not exploring identities. I think it's incredibly important to explore these identities. But then sometimes I think, again, how I felt, I put so much value on them that I lost myself when it's all connected. That's why I think like the important thing is like intersectionality. Every single experience is different, but every experience is still important.
Do you think we should live in a world, though, where you are just Tiana and you are just Neil? Or are they one and the same? Is that something we should even be striving for?
I say no. I think the rainbow is a good example of that in the world. We need color. We need difference. And it's okay to say what's different is. I think the real problem is around power. And that's what we're not naming, is that there is power associated with each identity and that there's a spectrum of power itself. And as a capitalist world, you said earlier, money is power, and I work in VC, so I know that too. It's like, where there's money, where money flows, that's what power will be. I want to tease that question out more of like, maybe it's not around like identities, more so like who gets the power with identity, which identities get the most power, because I think that's the core of it.
Part of it is time in some ways. America especially is very much like constantly changing, where a lot of these problems are not going to be solved overnight. And obviously we should make an effort to move the needle, but I think sometimes change people's opinions takes time. Getting the right people in power takes time. Mm-hmm. You can't necessarily always subvert like the entire society to be able to get there. So,
well, thank you all for sharing your perspectives. Let's take another quick break, and then we're gonna bring in a special guest. Wow,
awesome.
I was snapping.